March 23, 2003. 2:14 a.m. The sky over western Iraq was completely black, no moon, no city glow, no reference points. Just emptiness. 40,000 feet above that darkness, a B-2 Spirit bomber moved without lights, without sound, without being seen. Inside the cockpit, everything was controlled. Dim green instrument panels, heads-down displays, tactical overlays scrolling across digital maps. The aircraft had already crossed the point of no return. Then the radio cracked. Night 1, this is command. Abort mission. Repeat. Abort mission immediately. The words didn't come with explanation. They didn't need to. On the tactical display, a new bloom of radar energy pulsed across the screen. Multiple surface-to-air missile batteries had just activated. Search radars rotating. Tracking radars warming. Signal strength rising. Someone on the ground had realized something was in their sky. The co-pilot's voice stayed calm, but quieter than before. They're lighting up sectors 3 and 4. That wasn't random. That was triangulation. Another transmission cut through. Night 1. Confirm abort. Threat envelope expanding. You are cleared to withdraw. Abort meant survival. Abort meant turning west, disappearing back into the dark, living to fly another mission. Continue meant flying deeper into the most defended airspace in the region. For 3 seconds, nobody in the cockpit spoke. Not because they didn't know what to do, because they both knew exactly what the decision meant. On the display, the target box blinked steadily. A mobile command node. If it remained active, it would coordinate air defense repositioning by sunrise. If it stayed online, dozens of strike aircraft scheduled for morning operations would fly into a recalibrated defense grid. The pilot leaned forward slightly, eyes fixed on the narrowing corridor of safe passage. Radar arcs were tightening. Someone down there wasn't guessing anymore. They were hunting. Night 1. Command repeated, sharper this time. Abort now. The pilot's hand hovered over the throttle for half a second. Then he pressed the transmit switch. Negative abort. The cockpit went silent again. Not from fear, from commitment. And the B-2 kept flying forward. The B-2 Spirit was never designed to look intimidating. It doesn't roar like a fighter. It doesn't carry visible weapons. It doesn't even have a traditional shape. From below, it looks like a shadow that forgot to disappear. But the B-2 isn't invisible. That's the first myth. Stealth isn't about vanishing. It's about controlling how you are seen, and when. The aircraft's shape deflects radar waves away from their source. Its surface materials absorb specific frequencies. Its engine exhaust is flattened and cooled to reduce infrared signature. But none of that makes it untouchable. It makes it difficult. And difficult only works when the enemy doesn't know you're there. On the tactical display inside Night 1, radar emissions weren't random noise. They were patterns, sector sweeps, search rotations, tracking attempts. When a radar system begins to adjust frequency, it means something critical. It suspects stealth. That's when the real danger begins. Because once a defense network believes a stealth aircraft is present, it stops searching broadly. It narrows, it adapts, it hunts. And on March 23, 2003, the Iraqi Integrated Air Defense System was not asleep. It had mobile radar units repositioning every few hours, command vehicles shifting coordinates to avoid detection, surface-to-air missile batteries configured in layered arcs. The B-2 wasn't flying into chaos. It was flying into design. On the lower right of the display, a small indicator pulsed amber. Signal triangulation probability increasing. That meant at least 2 radar systems were starting to correlate returns. Not enough to lock, but enough to become curious. The co-pilot adjusted a heading by less than a degree. To an untrained eye, it would look meaningless. To radar mathematics, it changed reflection angles by fractions that could decide survival. The bomb bay doors remained sealed, because the moment they opened, even for seconds, the aircraft's radar cross-section would spike. And that spike could be enough. Command to Night 1. You are approaching updated threat envelope. Abort remains authorized. Authorized, not ordered. That difference mattered. The pilot didn't answer immediately. He zoomed the map overlay. The target, a mobile command node coordinating radar redistribution, was repositioning. Faster than intelligence predicted. If it moved outside the assigned strike window, the mission would collapse. And if the mission collapsed, the next wave of aircraft scheduled for dawn would fly blind into a defense grid that had just proven it could adapt. This wasn't about ego. It wasn't about bravery. It was about timing. Stealth only works when timing is perfect. And right now, timing was evaporating. Another radar bloom flared on the screen. Closer. The co-pilot exhaled slowly. They're adjusting pulse repetition frequency. That meant someone on the ground wasn't panicking. They were experimenting, testing returns, looking for anomalies in what should be empty sky. The pilot's hands didn't shake. They moved with deliberate precision. Altitude. Steady. Heading. Minor correction. Speed. Unchanged. Inside the cockpit, everything felt controlled. Outside, mathematics were tightening like a net. The B-2 had one advantage left. Surprise. But surprise has an expiration date. And the clock was almost out. At 2:19 a.m., something changed. It wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. It was mathematical. On the threat assessment display, the outer radar arcs shifted color, from soft amber to active red. That wasn't routine scanning anymore. That was track correlation. Two separate radar systems, positioned nearly 30 miles apart, were beginning to agree on something. They weren't seeing the aircraft clearly, but they were seeing enough disturbance in their returns to suspect a presence. That's how stealth dies, not from being detected once, but from being noticed twice. Night 1. Updated intelligence. Command transmitted. New mobile radar platform detected near Sector 5. Unknown range. Unknown range meant unknown coverage. Unknown coverage meant the flight path might already be compromised. The co-pilot zoomed out the map. 3 radar nodes now formed a loose triangle. Not perfectly aligned, but tightening. Correlation probability at 42%, he said quietly. 42% wasn't confirmation, but it was the tipping point where missile batteries begin preparing. Surface-to-air systems don't need visual contact. They need predictive geometry, and predictive geometry was forming. Another transmission came through. Night 1. Recommend immediate course reversal. Threat envelope expanding faster than expected. This time it wasn't calm. There was urgency beneath the control. Back at command, analysts were watching the same overlays, and they didn't like what they were seeing. The B-2's stealth profile was optimized for specific radar frequencies. But when operators suspect stealth, they begin cycling frequencies rapidly, altering pulse patterns, increasing dwell time, looking for reflections that don't behave like birds or noise. That's when even a low radar cross-section can flicker. And flicker is enough. Inside the cockpit, the pilot studied the geometry. The aircraft was 6 minutes from target release point, 6 minutes from completing the strike, 6 minutes from turning back west. If they aborted now, they would likely exit clean. If they waited 3 more minutes, they might cross into an unpredictable detection band. And if they crossed that line, the B-2 wouldn't dogfight. It wouldn't outrun missiles. It would rely entirely on not being tracked long enough to be targeted. Night 1. Command pressed again. Confirm abort. The pilot didn't answer. Instead, he reduced speed by a fraction. Just enough to adjust arrival timing without triggering significant profile change. He knew something command didn't. The target, the mobile command node, had just shifted position again. Its movement pattern wasn't defensive. It was preparing to relocate. If it relocated fully before the strike window, it would disappear under civilian infrastructure by sunrise. And then it would take weeks to find again. Weeks of flying into a reorganized defense grid. Weeks of risk multiplied. Another radar spike appeared. Closer now. Not a lock, but stronger than before. The co-pilot's voice dropped lower. They're close to predictive solution. Predictive solution meant trajectory modeling. Trajectory modeling meant missile pre-alignment. The pilot's jaw tightened. This was the moment. Abort and live. Continue and gamble on physics. The B-2 was designed to penetrate defenses. But it was never designed to be arrogant. Stealth doesn't forgive overconfidence. Outside, the sky remained black. Inside, the aircraft systems hummed in perfect discipline. On the screen, the target blinked. 6 minutes. 5.5 now. The pilot finally keyed the radio. Night 1 holding course. Command responded immediately. Say again. Night 1 holding course. A pause. Longer than before. Then, understood. That single word carried weight. Because now the responsibility shifted. No longer recommendation. No longer advisory. Now it was choice. And the aircraft continued forward. 2:23 a.m. 4 minutes to release point. The cockpit lights didn't change. The engine tone didn't change. Nothing felt dramatic, but the numbers did. Correlation probability. 61%. That number meant something very specific. It meant at least one radar node was no longer just searching. It was predicting. And once prediction stabilizes above 60%, surface-to-air batteries begin transitioning from passive to ready posture. Missiles don't need full visual lock to prepare. They need geometry, and geometry was converging. The co-pilot ran a rapid threat projection. If they get stable triangulation, we'll see a launch window in under 90 seconds. 90 seconds wasn't enough to climb. Not enough to dive. Not enough to disappear if the aircraft had already been modeled. Command to Night 1. Last confirmation. Abort still available. This wasn't pressure. This was liability control. If Night 1 continued now, the responsibility would not belong to headquarters. It would belong to the cockpit. The pilot leaned slightly closer to the forward display. He wasn't emotional. He wasn't dramatic. He was calculating. Altitude. Steady at 40,000 feet. Velocity. Optimized for low observable penetration. Radar cross-section. Minimal, unless bomb bay doors opened. That was the hidden danger. For 10 to 12 seconds during payload release, the aircraft's stealth geometry would be compromised. Bomb bay open equals cavity exposure. Cavity exposure equals radar bloom. If the enemy achieved even a partial predictive solution during that window, a missile battery could fire blind and still force defensive maneuvering. And defensive maneuvering reduces stealth advantage. This was not a fighter jet. There would be no flares, no high G turns, no cinematic escape, only absence, or impact. The radar bloom intensified again. One of the red arcs narrowed by 3 degrees. That was not coincidence. That was alignment. They're refining, the co-pilot said quietly. The pilot's eyes moved to the target box. Distance. 78 miles. Time to release. 3 minutes, 40 seconds. If they turned now, survival probability was high. If they continued, everything depended on timing precision measured in seconds. The radio crackled again. Night 1. We are seeing escalating radar behavior. Abort strongly advised. Strongly advised. That was the closest command could come to saying, we think you're about to die. The pilot inhaled slowly. Not fear. Focus. He thought about the wave scheduled at dawn. F-15s. F-16s. Support aircraft. Tankers. If the mobile command node remained active, those aircraft would fly into coordinated defense repositioning. More launches. More locks. More unpredictability. Stealth is powerful, but it is finite. And tonight, Night 1 carried the only strike window that could blind the network before sunrise. The co-pilot's voice lowered. If we open doors inside their predicted sweep, we light up. The pilot nodded once. I know. Correlation probability. 68%. 2 radar nodes were now aligned within 0.7 seconds of pulse sync. That meant the defense grid was no longer guessing. It was narrowing. Time to release. 2 minutes, 10 seconds. The pilot made a subtle correction. Less than half a degree. To a human eye, meaningless. To radar reflection geometry, everything. The red arc shifted slightly. Still tightening. But not perfectly. The decision line had been crossed. Not emotionally, mathematically. The pilot pressed the transmit switch. Night 1 continuing. No hesitation now. No room for debate. On the ground, analysts froze. Because once that sentence was spoken, there would be no more warnings. Only outcome. Time to release. 60 seconds. Correlation probability. 73%. Missile pre-alignment threshold. 75%. The cockpit went completely quiet. Even the hum of systems seemed distant. 50 seconds. 45. The co-pilot's eyes locked on radar scan timing. They're close. 30 seconds. The target coordinates stabilized. 20 seconds. The pilot's thumb hovered over release confirmation. 10 seconds. Outside, nothing changed. No lights. No sound. No sign that history was about to tilt. 5, 4, 3, 2. The bomb bay doors began to open. The bomb bay doors opened at 2:26 a.m. Inside the cockpit, there was no sound change. No dramatic shift. But on radar screens across hostile territory, something flickered. When a B-2 opens its bomb bay, the aircraft's smooth stealth geometry breaks. For a few seconds, it is no longer a pure flying wing. It becomes a cavity, a reflection point, a measurable anomaly. Time slowed into fragments. Second 1. Doors fully extended. Second 2. Internal sensors confirmed alignment. Second 3. Radar bloom intensified by 12%. On the threat display, the red arcs snapped tighter. Correlation probability. 76%. Missile pre-alignment threshold exceeded. On the ground, somewhere beyond the horizon, a surface-to-air battery shifted from search to engagement posture. But engagement posture doesn't equal lock. It equals readiness. The co-pilot's voice was steady. Tracking behavior unstable. They don't have a stable solution. Yet, second 5. Payload release confirmation armed. The target box locked into final coordinates. The mobile command node was stationary now, unaware that the sky above it had already chosen. Second 7. Radar pulse frequency changed again. Rapid cycling. That meant desperation. Operators on the ground were throwing variations, trying to catch a return before it vanished. Second 8. Release. The munitions dropped clean. No flash. No sound from the cockpit. Just weight reduction and confirmation tone. Second 9. Doors beginning to close. Second 10. Radar spike peaked. For an instant, on hostile screens, there was something. Not a plane. Not a shape. But a disturbance that didn't belong. Second 11. Doors sealed. The B-2 became a shadow again. In the cockpit, the threat display froze for half a heartbeat. Then updated. Correlation probability dropped. 76% became 63%. Because the predictive model they had been building no longer matched current geometry. The aircraft had shifted subtly during release, a maneuver measured in fractions. Enough to disrupt triangulation continuity. On the ground, the missile battery hesitated. To launch without stable tracking risked revealing position. To wait risked losing the target completely. They waited, and that hesitation saved the aircraft. Missile activity? The pilot asked. Negative launch detected, the co-pilot replied. But radar intensity surged. Now they were angry. Search patterns widened. Multiple nodes scanning aggressively. The B-2 didn't climb. It didn't dive. It didn't accelerate dramatically. Because dramatic movement creates measurable change. Instead, it became disciplined absence. Heading adjusted by half a degree. Altitude reduced by 300 feet over 90 seconds. Small, precise, invisible to anything not already locked. Behind them, 90 seconds after release, the target vanished. The mobile command node's signal went dark. First one frequency, then the backup. Then the entire coordination network in that sector fell silent. On the ground, confusion. On radar screens, frantic recalibration. But by then, Night 1 was already exiting the tightening arc. Correlation probability. 49%. Then 38%. Then 24%. The triangle collapsed. The B-2 was no longer being predicted. It was no longer being modeled. It was no longer being hunted effectively. The co-pilot exhaled slowly for the first time in minutes. They lost us, not because the aircraft was invisible, but because timing had broken their math. The sky returned to black, and the aircraft continued west. 2:31 a.m. 5 minutes after release, the B-2 was no longer inside the highest density of the threat envelope, but it wasn't safe. Not yet. Surface-to-air systems don't simply give up. When they lose correlation, they switch to area denial patterns. Wide sweeps, randomized frequency bursts, blind launches are rare, but not impossible. Inside the cockpit, everything remained controlled. No sudden movements, no sharp turns. The pilot reduced altitude gradually, sliding through layers of black sky like the aircraft was dissolving into it. Correlation probability: 18%. Radar intensity: fluctuating. One of the hostile nodes attempted rapid sweep mode, aggressive pulse cycling meant to catch delayed reflections. The co-pilot monitored missile warning sensors closely. Nothing. No plume signatures. No sudden energy spikes. Still, the danger wasn't over. The most dangerous moment for a stealth aircraft is not penetration. It's exit. Because exit means predictability. Penetration paths are carefully engineered. Exit paths can be inferred. Command to Night 1. Confirm payload. The pilot keyed the mic. Payload released. Target impact pending. Seconds later, the satellite relay confirmed it. Secondary signal from command node has ceased. Translation: the network went dark. On the ground, the mobile coordination system that had been redistributing radar coverage was gone. Not damaged, not degraded, gone. In the operations center back home, analysts leaned closer to their screens. Because what they were seeing wasn't just target neutralization. It was timing perfection. Had the B-2 aborted at 2:20, the command node would have relocated within 30 minutes. Had it delayed release by 60 seconds, triangulation probability would have crossed 80%. At 80%, missile pre-fire logic often commits. This mission balanced on less than a minute of difference. Back in the cockpit, the co-pilot finally allowed a controlled breath. They were close. The pilot nodded once. They were learning. That was the real concern. Because stealth doesn't dominate forever. It survives on adaptation gaps. And tonight, the gap had been narrow. Very narrow. The aircraft continued west, crossing the invisible line where hostile radar intensity faded into distance. Correlation probability: 7%. Threat envelope: disengaging. At 2:47 a.m., command transmitted again. Night 1, you are clear of primary threat grid. Return to base. No cheering. No dramatic acknowledgement. Just confirmation. Night 1 copies. The sky over hostile territory returned to silence. Below, confusion spread through a defense network that had almost succeeded. They had suspected stealth. They had adapted. They had nearly built the math. But nearly is not enough. At 3:12 a.m., a secure message reached command. Target neutralized. Aircraft intact. Short. Controlled. Professional. And history moved on without a headline. By sunrise, other aircraft crossed the same region. They flew into a defense grid that no longer coordinated effectively. Fewer locks, slower response, confused radar behavior. Most of them never knew why the air felt different. They never knew how close the night had come to changing. There was no press conference, no public recognition. The mission log recorded it in sterile language. Strike executed. No losses. But somewhere between 2:23 and 2:26 a.m., a decision had been made that wasn't about bravery. It was about understanding the math better than the enemy. Stealth isn't invisibility, it's timing. And that night, timing won.